Hey guys, what's up? Zillet here. I know it's been a while since my last video. I had some things to take care of, so now I'm back. Let me start out by quickly saying that getting as many views as I did on my first ever guide completely destroyed my goals. I had a lot of people curious about my build on that guide, so I'm here today to explain it all to you. As for patch 2.1, that is already into consideration, and this build will remain a viable build, which I will talk about at the end of my explanation. Now let's go through my build so I can explain to you the abilities I use and my perspective on why I should use it. First off, in my build I have my primary set to Electrocute. My rune I use is Lightning Blast. The reason I use Lightning Blast is because it goes through enemies doing 140% weapon damage as lightning, as well as the initial ability. So the fact it pierces through enemies is basically saying it has no cap on the amount it hits anything in its path. As for my secondary, I chose Arcane Orb with Frost Orb as my choice of rune. Frost Orb does 393% weapon damage as cold that shreds the area with ice bolts, as well as the initial ability, meaning this is an AoE spell as well as it slows. Slow monsters are dead monsters, being they rarely even get near you. Next on my list I use Archon. If you have the Veer's 4-piece, all Archon runes are active at once, which is super OP. This is a set bonus I would love to have, but I currently don't, so I use Combustion. I use this because it does 3,680% weapon damage within 15 yards when activating Archon, which means dead stuff. I will show you an example of these things later on in this video. You do have to go into a sort of suicide bomber style, so beware, but it is probably the funnest thing I've ever done, especially with massive mobs. You use one of the later abilities I'm going to talk about, Black Hole, suck them all in, and then boom, dead. Next I have two buffs I use. Energy Armor, which is 35% increase on armor with a 20 arcane power loss, which I will clear up momentarily. As for the rune, I use Pinpoint Barrier, being it grants me 5% critical hit chance, which means more damage. That is basically what this build is based off of, is damage. And speaking of damage, my second buff is Magic Weapon, which is a 10% damage increase, and as for the rune, I use Force Weapon, which increases this to 20%, so 20% free damage all day is fine with me. And one of the last abilities I use, and I love, it's new as of Reaper of Souls, most of you probably know, is Black Hole. This sucks all of the enemies into the Black Hole, which in my eyes just bundles them up for my AoE damage. I use Supermassive because of the increased distance, so I can gather more enemies together, as well as the 570% weapon damage this does over 2 seconds. Now for my passive abilities, there are many good options such as Cold Blood for increased cold damage, etc., but I'm going for a pure damage. What I mean by that is damage to everything I use at all times. So my first passive is Glass Cannon. This gives 15% increased damage but decreases armor and resistance by 10%, which you make back with energy armor. The second passive I have on my list is Prodigy. This gives 5 arcane power for casting any signature spell, in my case Electrocute. That way when I'm using Electrocute, I rebuild my arcane power faster to once again start orbing, because Frost Orb is our main source of damage. Now some bosses, for example Maltheo or Butcher, don't take the effect of Black Hole that sucks them in. They can take the damage, but most times they move by the time the damage is going, so there's no point in even using it. They are immune to it. So single target fights such as that, I switch to Familiar. I don't use Familiar for the base ability, I use it for Spark Flint, which is a rune, which grants me 10% increased damage, then I just continue with my normal rotation. My third passive is Astral Presence. This increases my maximum arcane power by 20 and the regeneration by 2 per second. This makes up for the loss from using energy armor, but also gives you that extra regen. And lastly, I use Elemental Exposure. This passive means that damaging enemies with arcane cold, fire, or lightning, so basically everything we use, causes them to take 5% more damage from all sources for 5 seconds. Each different damage type applies a stack, stacking up to 4 times, so 4 times 5%, that's 20% increased damage. Now passes and everything can be changed up based on personal preference. For example, Unwavering Will. I used to use this because when you stand still for 1.5 seconds, it increases all resist and armor by 20% and damage by 10. This is great, but as a wizard you don't have tons of time to stand still for that extra damage, so having extra damage while being mobile points to elemental exposure. Now as for this build, everything I have stated so far has nothing ahead of it in the upcoming patch 2.1 except buffs to make it all stronger. So if you use it now and you get enjoyment out of it and see how much damage you can do with these things, then you will love it even more when the patch hits. Now let me start with explaining these changes. Electrocute. Additional jumps no longer deal reduced damage, therefore you always get the full effect no matter where it jumps to. As for Arcane Orb, our main damage source, weapon damage increases from 381% to 435%. Keep in mind that's the initial damage, not the Frost Orb's AoE. The next change is to Archon. Now using Archon makes you immune to all crowd control effects. Yes, thank you. Black Hole will also receive a buff for our build. Weapon damage increases from 360% to 700% over 2 seconds on the base ability. When using Supermassive, the rune we use, weapon damage is increased from 570% to 1290% over 2 seconds, so 2 times what it does now. And for the times we use Familiar, weapon damage increases from 179% to 240%, and there are more changes to all of these skills, but I am just stating the ones that are going to benefit this specific build. So then you don't have to worry about what you're going to do in 2.1 and is this going to be outdated or not. Now on a side note, I would like to quickly point out that those are patch notes. They could change. If they do change, I apologize, but I don't see them going down. I see them only going up or remaining where they're at. Now that we are done with my build though, I'm going to quickly show what I place my Paragon Points in on my wizard. This can vary on gear, playstyle, just about anything, so keep that in mind when you're dealing with this. As for my first tier of Paragon Points, I place my points into movement speed. Now movement speed caps at 25%, so you want to check your current movement speed with your gear by going to details and scrolling down to the very bottom, and then place percent you need to get to 25% into Paragon Points, and the rest place into intelligence for damage. My second tier, I started out with 50% crit hit damage. From there I will probably start putting more into crit hit chance, but I will just have to see where I go from there. My third tier has a switch between life and all resist. It's pretty simple. And as for my fourth tier, has resource cost reduction. At this point, with 10% cost reduction, I can see one more Frost Orb than I do without it, so that's just more damage. Now as for my follower, I use the Enchantress. I put some gear on her that I did not need, and I also got the focus that allows the Enchantress to access all abilities at once. This means that while using the Enchantress, I have all of her buffs, her CC, all of it at once. This is probably the most useful thing I've come across, and the Enchantress made soloing that much more simple. Not to mention the chance to charm her staff has, as well as the ability to charm. So not only does she CC, but she makes enemies fight for me. Now here I want to show you in action why I love my setup. I have some enemies gathered up here to show you an example. I bring them all together and then explode with Archon. And in this clip I did a quick crypt run to show gathering the enemies with Black Hole and then exploding on them with Archon. Basically killed everything in its path. Then you just beam while pressing 1 for the AoE pulse, or melee where you stand while doing the pulse. Either way, things die. And here's a quick clip of me switching to familiar and using Spark Flint, killing the Butcher. And there you guys have a guide to my wizard's build. You can now get out there and build your own Frozen Orb Wizard. Go ahead and hit like if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe and comment on what you would like to see in the future.